So trying to break down an entire alien species into one video is a little bit difficult, so we're going to break these up into several, but today we're going to be talking about the Asari, specifically some of their culture, some of their history, and how they became one of the council races. So for people who aren't really into Mass Effect, the Asari are basically the sexy blue people, is the best way to describe them. They're all over the Mass Effect franchise, and something interesting about them is that they were actually the very first species to not only find the Citadel, which kind of acts as the main hub for the Milky Way, but they also founded the Citadel Council with the Solarians first, which acts as kind of the main governing body for the entire Milky Way. Also, when we went to Andromeda, the next galaxy over, they were one of the first Ark species to arrive. So they are a monogendered species that kind of portray more feminine than masculine, and they reproduce a lot differently than most species, which we'll get into all of that later down the line. But something very cool, in my opinion, is they don't have any special, healing abilities or anything like that, but they can live up to 1,000 years, which most species cannot. And they actually have 3 different life cycles, which are maiden, matron, and matriarch. And we'll deep dive into each of those cycles as well later on. So let's deep dive a little bit into how they construct their government, because it's very odd to me, just being from the States. I'm not used to it, but it's also very interesting how they function. So from their reproduction all the way to their government, the Asari are all about interacting and learning from other species. They trade information and knowledge freely with all other races, and that's how they grow their government. They don't have any official politicians or elections or anything like that, but instead they kind of carry an all-inclusive approach to policies and debates and things of that nature. It's actually kind of interesting because all of their policies, debates, things of that nature take place over chat rooms and forums that are modded by virtual intelligence. So this means that instead of having any kind of official hierarchy system, the entire community can vote on different policies and amendments and things of that nature over a chat room, over the extranet. However, one downfall to this is, the Asari are very long-term people, and they kind of take the same approach to these policies through the chat rooms. And if they need immediate action, they usually refer to one of the matriarchs who are older and wiser and have more experience. So if they need, immediate action, they'll usually turn to someone like that to give them sage advice on what to do. So in regards to Asari history, Asari scholars kind of got here early, which they take a lot of pride in. Asaris are very proud that they were the first for pretty much everything in the Milky Way, or so they say. From the writings to the agriculture to the research and studying ruins, they are very big on being the first to everything. They live for ever and ever and ever. But they're also one of the earliest species in the galaxy, so, they were able to really find and research and study all these amazing things, and they are the reason that we have the information that we do now. So basically how the Asari found the Citadel in the first place was they were actually studying Prothean ruins, which led them to making their own space station and things of that nature, and then they found the Citadel, and then they founded the Citadel Council, and they just kind of kept rolling from there. And keep in mind, the Citadel Station was completely extinct. The last species to even interact with most of the galaxy were the Protheans, which at this point, when we start Mass Effect 1, they're long extinct. They're so extinct they might as well be a rumor that doesn't exist, just like the Reapers. So the fact that the Asari found this abandoned station, that the only other people who had touched them, the last people that touched them were the Protheans, and they're here studying Prothean ruins, it all kind of connects. So TLDR, Mass Effect lore, Mass Effect history in general would not exist without the Asari. So to talk about an entire species in Mass Effect would be nearly impossible for one video, so we've been breaking them down into separate videos, and today we are going to completely focus on Asari biology. So Asari don't have any fancy smancy healing abilities, but they can live to be up to 1,000 years old. And something also that's kind of cool about them is a lot of people think they're strictly female, but they're actually a monogendered species. And they're more feminine leaning, but they're basically non-binary. So two Asari who both present as feminine, one could be a father, and then one could be a mother. It's also important to note that even though they are monogendered, it doesn't automatically mean that they're asexual. So Asari's orientation can pretty much be anything. So Asari reproduce differently than most species. They actually do something called melding, which is when they attune their own nervous system with their partners, and their nervous system sends signals through the skin. So ever since leaving their home planet of Thessia, Asari have been very keen on reproducing with other species. You can reproduce with another Asari, but being born as a pureblood is seen as bad or negative. The term pureblood is actually used as a derogatory insult. And there's stories of Asari being with every type of species from Turian even to Krogan. The reason the whole pureblood thing is so negative and so derogatory is because Asari are very keen on sharing their knowledge and gaining knowledge to help them grow as a species. Being with other species helps their species evolve. So mating with any species outside of an Asari is seen as positive, whereas mating with an Asari is seen as a negative just because there's no room to evolve that way. However, if a pureblood is born from two different Asari, then there's a chance that they could become an Ardok Yakshi, which will be explained in another TikTok. Now, I'm not quite sure, and I couldn't find if all pureblood Asari are automatically born with the genetic condition of being an Ardok Yakshi, or if there is just a percentage of it. But either way, it's very uncommon and seen as a negative to be a pureblood and be born because of that risk of becoming an Ardok Yakshi. Another interesting fact about Asari biology is that the whole melding thing is actually why Asari are all born with biotics. And just as a reminder, biotics are basically like Mass Effect's version of space magic. And because they have the ability to meld with other species and things like that, they're automatically born with the biotic gene. Now, depending on whether the gene is developed or not, whether the biotic powers are developed and really honed in, is entirely up to the individual Asari. But all Asari do have biotics to some degree. Very few species outside of Asari actually have the ability to handle most biotics, especially at higher levels. That's why humans or other species who have the biotic genes, such as Jack, for example, Subject Zero, are so impressive because she's really honed in the biotic ability as a Asari Huntress would, or maybe even a Justicar might. So as mentioned previously, even though they don't have any special fancy smancy healing abilities, Asari can live up to 1,000 years old, and this is actually separated into 3 different stages. There's the maiden, the matron, and the matriarch, different life stages. So let's talk a bit about that. So the maiden stage starts at birth and goes until the age of 350, and this stage is all about exploring, wanting experiences, curiosity, restlessness, etc. This is the excitable teen who wants to get out there and explore the world. The matron stage starts at 350 and goes until the age of 700, and this is the stage, just like the name implies, matronly. This is when they want to settle down. They want to find their partner. They want to have kids. They want to grow a family. They want to settle and be content. So the very last stage is matriarch, and this goes from age 700 until death. And this is when you really get to reap the benefits of what you've sown throughout life, right? So these are the wisest Asari in your community. These are the sages, the counselors, the ones giving advice, especially for Asari government. They view matriarchs as a higher authority. They've lived for at least 700 plus years. They have tons of experience. They have tons of intelligence. They're willing to share that and to pass it on to other Asari who are growing up and going through life, especially after they pass. So at the beginning of Mass Effect 1, Liara might be considered in the maiden stage, or at least just passing it, because she's very young. Even though she's over 100, she's very young as far as Asari goes. Whereas a maiden stage Asari might be someone like, like Morant, or possibly even Shiala. And then, of course, matriarch stage would be like Matriarch Benezia, Samara, who's a Justicar, because they're older, they're wiser, they're turned to for advice and wisdom. So, we've already talked about Asari government, Asari biology, the Asari Council, and a brief history on them. So today, let's talk about my favorite part of the Asari, which are the Ardat Yakshi, the AYs. So this one might be kind of lengthy just because there's so much information on them, but also there's a lot of contradicting information on them, specifically when it comes to Mass Effect 2 and the things that Samara says. So some of it's true, some of it's not. I'm not really sure. I'm just going off the wiki and my own experience playing the games, and I also might throw a few of my own little theories and stuff in there but let's talk about these dangerous, beautiful creatures. So the term Ardat Yakshi, which is so hard for me to say in a quick little sentence, so we're just going to call them AYs. But the AYs, the name means Demons of the Night Wind, and what they are is literally pure blood Asari. And if you remember way back in a previous TikTok I did, being a pureblood as an Asari is seen as a bad thing. Your species is supposed to go out and mate and meet other people and form with other species. So being born of two different Asari is seen as a bad thing. And sometimes when those Asari are born as a pureblood, they develop a genetic condition called, the Ardat Yakshi. They become an Ardat Yakshi because it's seen as bad. So, when Asari go to mate with someone, they go to meld with someone, they connect nervous systems, right? Well, Ardat Yakshi, when they go to mate with someone, their nervous systems literally fry the other person's. They overwhelm all their senses, and it often leads to death. Also, unfortunately, even though they had the exact same sex drive as any other typical Asari, they are unfortunately sterile. So imagine having to go your whole life knowing that if you tried melding with someone or even having a partner, they could potentially become a vegetable or even die, and you're never going to be able to have kids. Psychologists believe that this whole lifestyle choice means that AYs can't develop empathy, so they end up becoming psychotic instead. But I don't really believe that. Keep in mind that a defining feature of the Asari as a species is reproduction. They want to further their species. They want to bring in more intelligence, more resources, more creativity. So being an Asari and not being able to reproduce could really do a lot to a person. So as I mentioned, the AY gene happens when you're born. You're born with it, mostly when you're from two purebloods. Although not every pureblood child is an AY, such as the case as Liara. But it starts showing during your maiden phase. So the equivalent of hitting puberty is when it starts showing its ugly genes. There's also a lot of myths and childhood campfire stories around AYs, and they were seen as the gods of death and destruction in old times. So at best, you're seen as an anti-hero, and at worst, you're seen as a monster trying to kill everybody. Despite all these camp stories to scare children and stuff, though, they're actually not that rare, and they're not really all killers. I mean, yeah, we have Morinth, but she's kind of the exception. Most AYs are very peaceful, and they are very aware of their condition, so they just try to, chill out and live their life in isolation. And actually, around 1% of the Asari population end up being AYs. Most AYs are actually put in different kind of work programs, or otherwise kept secluded from the rest of humanity. And actually, in the game, we visit a monastery where all these AY students are focused on study and quiet and meditation, at least until the Reaper attack. In extreme cases of AY, like if they actually are psychotic and trying to kill people, like Morinth is, then they are put in specialized hospitals or high security prisons, or they're just straight up executed by Justicars like Samara. And right now, of course, there's no known cure for this because it is a birth-given disease. Like, you can't catch it or give it to somebody else. You can't develop it later on in life. Like, you are born with it because you are a pureblood. But it's also important to note that not every pureblood Asari is an Ardak-Yashi, but every Ardak-Yashi is a pureblood Asari, if that makes sense. And as a little pro gamer tip, if you want to know what happens if you decide to mate with an AY, like the silly little goof you are, go ahead and play the game, but romance Morinth instead. You'll learn. You'll learn. So it's kind of impossible to talk about an entire species, especially one like the Asari, in a succinct manner. But today we're going to do our best to break down the culture of the Asari. So in case you haven't played the Mass Effect franchise, which if you haven't, I don't know why you're watching this video, or if you haven't caught up on my other previous TikToks specifically about different aspects of the Asari as a race, basically the important thing to know here is that the entirety of Mass Effect would not exist without the Asari, without our sexy blue people, right? The Asari are main character energy TM. Because they live for so long, they think of everything in big picture. They don't think of the immediate future. They think of the future, 50 to 100 years from now. So everything is much more thought of in several years instead of several hours. This also means that they're much more passive observers versus immediately taking action, such as the Krogan would, for example. So it's not really talked about directly, especially in the games, because I don't think the Asari would ever be confrontational like this, but they are often the superior race. They feel like the superior race. It's one of the stigmas that are put on them. And often, more times than not, it's kind of true. Like I said, they have main character energy. They are the reason the Protheans are studied. They're the reason the Mass Effect relays kind of happened. They're the reason the Council started to begin with. Now, let's not get it twisted. They wouldn't be able to do any of this without other races, such as Turians, Solarians, Krogan, etc. But they're very holier than thou in a weird sort of way. But they're like oddly humble and quiet about it, very non-confrontational with how main character they are. So it's kind of a weird juxtaposition there. Just as they wouldn't call somebody a pureblood to their face, like when an Asari is born of two different Asari parents, but they would talk about it behind their back. I kind of have the feeling that they probably think that they're like, kind of the big britches of the galaxy, but they would never say that. That's impolite. That's not becoming of their species. They're all generous. They want to connect with other species. That's their whole point, right? So the long-term, big picture kind of mindset actually is what drew a lot of Asari to sign up for the Andromeda Initiative, because, in their mind, a 600-year nap, that's nothing. We got that. We think in terms of long term anyways. We're looking at the bigger picture. So going on a journey for 600 years from the Milky Way to the Andromeda Galaxy, and even going over there to repopulate and discover new species, like that's an Asari's dream. That's their whole thing. That's their whole culture, right? Like repopulation, sharing knowledge and stuff, and thinking in terms of big picture. So Asari were very well known for spreading their culture and their intelligence through economic powers, through military powers, through political powers. Like, their whole thing is spreading their culture, essentially. And no, it's not just through melding and repopulating. They're not just trying to spread their seed and hope for the best. They're actively trying to improve their race through the influence of other races and other means. Basically anywhere they can stick their grubby little hands in, right? So the biggest economy of EZO, or Element Zero, which is a highly sought after resource in the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies, is actually found on Thessia, which is the Asari's homeworld. So Thessia is actually made up of a bunch of small city-states that are all democratic, and these are actually called the Asari Republic. So as I talked about a few TikToks ago, talking about the Asari government, a lot of these discussions for democracy are actually taking place over the extra. So basically, like every big political or government decision that the Asari make, like voting or whatever the case may be, it all takes place over an internet poll. Imagine, voting for your next president by taking an internet poll and hoping for the best. Like that's basically how it is. So the Asari military is actually a lot smaller than a lot of people think they are, but they're very intimidating. That's why the main thing you hear about, especially when playing through the games, are the Asari commandos or the huntresses, for example. These girls are not to be messed with. Asari military is very small but very impactful and very intimidating. The military is not only made up of the commandos, like I mentioned, the huntresses, but they also have like the Justicars. They have their own types of specters. Of course, there's Asari specters, like duh. And they also have a bunch of peacekeepers. Also, something that's kind of interesting is that Cora Harper from Mass Effect Andromeda was also an Asari commando. And I know you're thinking, like, how can a human be an Asari commando? That's a great question. All you gotta do is play the Mass Effect Andromeda game, because let me tell you, all Cora Harper talked about is how she used to be an Asari commando, and how she became an Asari huntress. And that's her only personality trait, besides the fact that she likes flowers. So, yeah. Obviously, you can't sum up a person's entire culture in a few bullet points, especially not in a really short TikTok. But those are the main points of the Asari that just really fascinated me, And obviously, I'm making specific TikToks on the other aspects of their culture and their military and their government that fascinated me, such as the Ardak being such a prominent part in their culture, in their campfire stories. Their military doctrine. Like, if you play the games, like, even if you just play the trilogy, you hear a lot about the Asari commandos. You meet several huntresses on your journey. You learn about their police force, how that works, how their systems work, how the Justicars work as compared to the rest of society. It's just very, very fascinating to deep dive into. Talking about the Asari specifically from the Mass Effect franchise is a little bit daunting to break down in one video, so today we are going to talk about the military doctrine. Because that doesn't sound intimidating at all, right? So surprisingly enough, the Asari military is a collection of warriors with no real structure or organization to them. So each community actually organizes its own military unit, and then they vote on who the commander is. So you remember back in a past TikTok where I was talking about the government and how they vote on everything through polls via the extranet? The military is kind of the same way. The military officials are chosen by the community. So it's kind of like a majority rules type deal. And funny enough, there's no real military uniform involved either. But don't get it twisted, these people are not here to play. They are professional as it gets. So as we already kind of know, the military for the Asari is called the Asari Commandos or the Asari Huntresses. And most Huntresses join during their maiden stage, which means they've already had about like 20 or 30 years of hardcore combat training, mostly martial arts. And just like a child prodigy, they are chosen from a young age and trained up to become a military commando or huntress. Unlike what we see with traditional militaries, Asari commandos and huntresses will either fight completely by themselves or they'll fight with one other person. It's very rare to see commandos in massive groups or fighting together. Also, something I find kind of interesting, even though all Asari do possess the biotic ability due to their melding, if you haven't trained those biotics, if they are not honed in perfectly, then you are not accepted into their military service. You have to be one of the best biotics in order to join the Asari commandos. Try saying that 5 times fast. I mentioned before that the Asari are kind of bigger picture people. They don't really get like directly involved or solve an issue directly right then and there. The military is kind of the same way, so they're more involved in like spec op missions and guerrilla warfare. And weirdly enough, they don't even have that heavy of armor, unlike, say, the Krogan or the Turian or even some of the human soldiers. They kind of have light armor, so they're not about to run into a battle like front-facing. Asari are small, they're fluid, they're graceful, so they're all about, ambushes, infiltration, assassinations. They do the sneaky shit that nobody else wants to do. A popular Turian saying about the Asari is that the Asari are the finest warriors in the galaxy. There's just so very few of them, which is probably for the best, because if there was an Asari commando unit that was the same size as, for example, the Krogan military or the Krogan forces, we might be in a little bit of trouble. So, TLDR, basically, if you happen to run into an Asari Commando or an Asari Huntress, you're basically running into a very blue John Wick. What if you were under the belief that God existed in all things, places, creatures, and the entire universe? Today, we're going to talk about Asari religion. The name of the Asari religion is actually Siari. Asari, Siari, I know. But Siari means all is one, which is basically a good way to sum up how they see things. So the core truths of this religion are that the universe is conscious, that everything in the universe is part of a greater whole, and that when you die, your soul melds back into the universe. While they don't directly believe in reincarnation, it's more like a recycling. So your soul, your energy, gets put into another body as their own energy. So like when an Asari dies, their soul, their energy, their spirit goes into another Asari. So Siari as a religion was actually founded after the Asari learned that they could meld, because the whole process of melding is kind of teaching Asari that everybody is one. The Asari meld with all types of different species to try and grow their own species, just as we talked at length in previous TikToks. But Siari as a religion came about because melding kind of showed them that they can bond with anybody, that they are one with everybody. They are one with the entire universe through melding. Siari priestesses, their whole entire job, their whole reason for existence is to basically meld and make sure that the universe is aware of each other, so like not only talking about individuals and different species being aware of each other, but the universe as a whole, everything, every form of life, knowing that all the other forms of life around it are one with it, if that makes sense. So in a weird way, Siari priestesses just kind of want everybody to hold hands and know about each other. In their mind, this is how they can bring the universe closer together. Because keep in mind, this is way in the future of Mass Effect. So the universe is spread out among billions and billions of stars. There's life forms of different types everywhere. There's literally an entire section of space called Asari space. So Asari priestesses want the entire universe to feel that much closer, that much more cohesive. So something kind of interesting is that Siari is not the only Asari religion. It kind of took over as the main one, similar to how Christianity is in the United States. But Siari was not the first or the last religion that Asari practiced. And this is not even the only religion that Asari practice. Some don't practice this religion at all. One of the most popular religions before Siari kind of took over was called the Athame Doctrine. And I know I'm probably butchering that name, but she, as far as I can tell, was just a typical, very, very powerful, very influential biotic Asari. And this is kind of just my kind of theory here, but I believe the statues of the Asari that are found around the monastery, as well as found around Desia in Mass Effect 3, which is the Asari homeworld, is statues or looking similar to what Athame would have looked like. And she was the goddess of, like, prophecy. She was goddess of fate, which kind of falls in line with the whole idea of melding and, you know, how Liara can determine your visions and things like that. I think that kind of links together somehow. I'm not quite sure how, but it matches up with what we've seen of the Asari so far. So that's really interesting to me. So to put it in kind of an earthly, like American sort of perspective, you know, we have tons of different religions. We have Christianity, Buddhism, you know, like all this kind of different things. But imagine if we skip ahead to the future and we land on Mars and suddenly everybody says goodbye to Christianity and everybody that you talk to is like really into pantheism and really just thinks that like all their religions are the same and that they all worship the same thing, which low-key is kind of the Christianity doctrine, kind of taking over all other religions and kind of saying that all other religions are wrong about their God. But like, that's neither here nor there. That's neither here nor there.